This is the thoracic vertebrae. The spinous process always points down, and right here is the costal facet. This is the lumbar vertebrae. It has a big thing coming out. These are the special characteristics for the cervical vertebrae. The first two vertebrae on the cervicals are the atlas, which is the top one, and then the axis, which is the bottom, because atlas is before axis in the alphabet. And so this is known as C1, and this is known as C2. The transverse foramen are these holes on the side, and then the odontoid process is this at the top, and then there's the bifid spinous process, and bi means two, and there's like two sides. So these are the vertebrae. There's three different kinds. There's the cervical vertebrae, the thoracic, and the lumbar.
First, I'm going to do the frontal bone, and then second, I will do the maxilla bone. The frontal bone starts with the supraorbital margins, which are these ridges right here. If you feel your face, it's the brow bones. And then below them and above the eye is the supraorbital foramen, the holes that go into the eye socket. Then you have the zygomatic process of the frontal bone. This is the zygomatic bone. So the zygomatic process of the frontal bone would be this line right here. So the zygomatic process of the frontal bone is this, where you're going, the zygomatic process to where you've been, so the frontal bone. The glabella is this flat area right here, right in between the supraorbital margins. And then you have the frontal sinuses, which are in here. On a real skull, they'd be more prominent, but here they're just, that's where they are. And then you have the maxilla bone, which is from here down, so the front of your teeth, and then it has the nose as well. The frontal process of the maxilla bone is this line right here, because the maxilla goes all the way up and then connects with the frontal bone right here. The zygomatic processes are over here on this side, so the zygomatic process of the maxilla bone, and then also on this side as well. Then you have the infraorbital foramen, which are right here, or right here. Those are the two holes in the maxilla bone. And then you have the anterior nasal spine, which is, if you look at it, or like that actually, that's probably best. Right here, it's this part of your nose that sticks out into the maxilla bone. And then you have the alveolar processes, are the areas that hold the teeth in place. So all of these, and then you also have them on the bottom teeth as well. And then you have the maxillary sinuses. If you go to a doctor's appointment and they like press in on your cheeks right around here, those are where your sinuses are. It's just they're in those holes. And then you have the palatine process. This is the maxilla bone, and then this is the palatine bone. So it's like the top of your roof, or the roof of your mouth in the back. And then the palatine process is this line right here. So it's the palatine process of the maxilla bone. Alright, today we are doing the coxal bone. It is just the pelvis. First, to connect the two parts of the pelvis, we have the symphysis pubis. And then after that, on the back side, we have the acetabulum. This is where your femur will go. It's just the ball and socket, ball and socket joint. On top, the top half is the ilium. The iliac crest is the top of the pelvis, and then the anterior superior iliac spine is on the opposite side of the greater sciatic notch, so it is the top spine, and then the inferior iliac spine is on is below it, so anterior and superior. And then on the opposite side, with the same side as the greater sciatic notch, you have the posterior superior iliac spine, the posterior inferior iliac spine, and then you have the greater sciatic notch, the big divot. You have the iliac fossa. You have the auricular surface, which is where the sacrum connects to the pelvis. And then we start with the ischium. The ischium goes from here to about here. The ischial spine is the ridge, and then the lesser sciatic notch is below that, so greater ischial spine and then lesser sciatic notch. The ischial tuberosity is the rough area of the ischium. And then you have the obturator foramen, the big and only foramen in the pelvis. And then you have the ischial ramus, which is down here. And then we go to the pubis, which is the only part left of the pelvis. It's right here to right about here. You have the superior pubic ramus up at top, the inferior pubic ramus, and then the pubic crest. All right, this is again one half of the pelvis. To know whether it's left or right, the best way of figuring out is putting your hand into the greater sciatic notch to cover the acetabulum. Whichever hand covers the acetabulum, that's the hand it is. So since this doesn't cover it, it's not the right, it's the left. To figure or to remember some parts of the pelvis, like the auricular surface. Auricular means ear, and so you put it next to your ear to, it looks like you're talking on the phone. And then you talk into the pelvic crest, and then you have the obturator foramen. You're talking to the obturator to try and, talk to people.
Okay, this is the sacral canal. This is the auricular surface right here on the side. This is the posterior sacral foramen, and on the other side is the anterior sacral foramen. And these are the transverse lines. And this is the coccyx. This is the medium sacral crest.
Yeah.
The next one we have is called the hinge joint. A good example of this is at the elbow, and it's just like a door. You can imagine a door opening and closing, just like your elbow when you flex and extend your elbow. It's called a hinge joint. The next one is called a pivot joint. Good example is the radius and ulna bone, where these two rotate. When you rotate your wrist from supination to pronation, it's a pivot joint. The next one is called the ball and socket joint, and it's kind of simple. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's usually a good example is at the shoulder, where you can rotate that bone in lots of different directions. The next one is called an ellipsoid joint, and these joints are usually found wherever there's a condyle, usually like the occipital condyles on the neck. They can kind of rotate pretty well, move your head. The next joints that we have are called synovial joints, and there's several different kinds of these. The first one we have is called the plane joint, and it's usually in between two vertebrae. This kind of joint, as you can see in the picture, just kind of slides. Not very much though. The next one we have is called the saddle joint. A good example is in the thumb. When you rotate your thumb different directions, it uses this kind of a joint, and as you can see, it has lots of movement here. The next one is called a symphysis, and this is where it joins two bones together using cartilage, and this is always cartilage. It'll be there. Alright, the next ones that we have are the cartilaginous joints, and there are two different kinds. The first one we're going to talk about is the synchondrosis, and this is where the sternum is connected to the ribs at this joint right here.